Good evening. Welcome to tonight's virtual Public Insights lecture. My name is Sally Shortall. I'm a professor here in the university and I co-chair the Public Insights Committee. I'm delighted that we have tonight's speaker, Heidi Larson, with us. Heidi is going to be talking about something quite topical. She's talking about stock, how vaccine rumours start and why they won't go away. I will return after the lecture for a live Q&A with Heidi. So if you would like to ask a question, then use the drop-down chat box in the YouTube, or you can tweet us at Insights NCL. If you want to chat about the event while it's going on, then just use hashtag Insights NCL. Here now to more formally introduce Heidi is Colin Wood, who is a professor of molecular microbiology here in Newcastle University. So enjoy the lecture and I'll see you shortly.
Good evening and thank you for logging in to this Newcastle University Insights lecture. My name is Colin Wood and I'm Professor of Molecular Microbiology here at Newcastle University. And it's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our speaker this evening, Professor Heidi Larson, whose talk is entitled How Vaccine Rumours Start and Why They Don't Go Away. Until about a year ago, vaccination was generally taken for granted, and it wasn't widely appreciated that many of the pursuits that we take for granted today, such as global travel, are only possible because of vaccination. The history of vaccination goes back many centuries, but our modern concept of vaccination was developed towards the end of the 18th century by the pioneering English country doctor, Edward Jenner. Undertaking a small-scale clinical trial on an 8-year-old boy that would certainly not be approved today, he showed that a sample of cowpox pustule containing the virus that causes the mild cowpox disease could protect against the highly contagious and deadly smallpox disease. Jenner himself coined the word vaccine from the word vaxa, which is Latin for cow. As a result of Jenner's discovery, vaccination was widely adopted throughout Europe in the 19th century. However, when several European countries, including England, made the vaccination of children compulsory, there was strong opposition in some quarters, resulting in riots in cities such as Leicester and even Newcastle. It is interesting that this response is mirrored in many of the discussions that are aired in the media today. And so to our speaker, Professor Larson is uniquely qualified to talk about the anti-vaccination movement and the damage it causes. Based at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, she is director of the Vaccine Confidence Project, a member of the WHO SAGE Working Group on Vaccine Hesitancy. She grew up in Massachusetts, studied at Harvard and Berkeley universities, and in addition to the London School, holds positions at the universities of Washington and Antwerp. Professor Larson's research involves analysing the social and political factors that can affect the uptake of health interventions and how these influence policies. She recently published a book entitled Stuck, How Vaccine Rumours Start and Why They Don't Go Away. I'm sure you will enjoy her lecture.
Good afternoon. I'm Heidi Larson and I'm very happy to be here today. I'm going to talk about my new book and the story behind it, which is how vaccine rumors start and why they don't go away. Sorry, while I get set up here. I am a professor of anthropology, risk, and decision science at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and I've been studying the topic of rumors for many years, but particularly fascinated and followed the stories of how vaccine rumors evolved for the last 20 years almost. And 10 years ago, I founded the Vaccine Confidence Project, which is a group of different skills, different types of data set, from social media to survey work to in-depth qualitative research. And we come together, and as a group, what we have in common, aside from our different disciplines, including anthropology also and psychology, is trying to understand what is driving the different rumors and issues around vaccines around the world. Why do I care? Well, rumors actually are not just gossip. Rumors can have serious public health impacts, particularly when it comes to vaccines. One of the big rumor events that really prompted me to leave UNICEF, where I was working at the time, and investigating some of the rumors on behalf of the Global Immunization Program, was that I saw how complex and damaging some of these rumors could be. And that's why I founded the Vaccine Confidence Project. And that was the beginning of my research and writing for the book Stuck. In one state in northern Nigeria, Kano State, the governor of the state boycotted the polio vaccination program for a mix of religious reasons, but dominantly political reasons and underlying distrust, not only in central government in Nigeria, but globally. That boycott, that 11-month boycott from 2003 to 2004, led to the spread of that Nigerian strain of the virus around the world as far as Indonesia, and cost the polio program $500 million. And there was no adverse event. There was no problem with the vaccine. It was just a rumor. Rumors and misinformation, disinformation is a global challenge. It's rapidly evolving. We've seen it loud and clear in the context of COVID. This is a map that we did in an article mapping the spread of sentiments around the HPV vaccine, which I'll come back to a bit later. We constantly are listening for and we measure people's sentiments about vaccine. We do that, as I mentioned, through survey work, through social listening in 100 different languages, and research groups that go out and do focus groups and in-depth interviews. A few months ago, we published an article in The Lancet that looked at all of our survey data on the people's confidence in the importance, safety, and effectiveness of vaccine. Do they work? And are they compatible with my religious beliefs? As you can see here, the dark blue is positive confidence, the dark red is low to no confidence, and confidence in the importance of vaccine actually went up between 2015 and 2018, but not so much with effectiveness, and even less so with confidence in the safety of vaccine. And one of the things we look for is trends. What's changing in the population? Why are they all of a sudden saying, I don't know if I trust that vaccine? And that's where we start to uncover rumors and try to understand what prompted them. In this case, we notice a trend where Northern Africa was becoming less and less confident over those few years. But we also notice that it's mostly the French-speaking countries in Africa, and France has the least confidence in vaccines around the world, consistently in our global covering, and there's a spread of sentiment along with language diaspora. We're seeing that with other countries too, where people travel, where they migrate, and even in refugee situations, they're constantly in touch these days with their home country. And if there's, or in other languages, in other countries with the same language, they're reading that kind of language media. So rumors can spread through common language groups as well as in multiple other ways. We saw that in those 3 years, the biggest drops in confidence were in Indonesia and the Philippines. So the first thing we try to look at is what prompted that? Why did the whole country in a nationally representative sample start to drop in their confidence? Well, there was a story behind each of these countries. In the Philippines, which was the top 10 in positive confidence around vaccines in 2015, dropped to 70th in the hierarchy of countries. What went on? Well, there was a real saga around a dengue vaccine, a big public panic, because in this case, there was a small risk announced about the dengue vaccine just a year after it had been introduced, that for some people that didn't have any exposure at all to dengue, actually the vaccine could make it worse. But in Brazil, they changed the labeling. They advised only people who had previous dengue to take the vaccine to avoid a more serious case later. But in the Philippines, it became a big political drama, and people lost a lot of confidence in the government, and not just in the dengue vaccine, but in the vaccination program. To the extent that these things persist, these underlying trust issues persist. So that issue, and it wasn't totally a rumor, the actual risk was real, but rumors spread about the government and the reasons why they let such a vaccine into the country. And it created a lot of antagonism and polarization, which is still a problem and is still an issue in the Philippines around COVID. Indonesia, why did they have such a drop? Well, after years of taking the measles vaccine, one year a group of Islamic leaders decided they weren't sure about this measles vaccine, and it wasn't halal. It wasn't approved, or they didn't feel like it was legitimate for the Muslim community, that it must have had some amount of porcine in it. So it created a panic. It was recovered. There was a lot of consultation with the Islamic body to restore some trust, but these issues still lingered as the COVID vaccine is being rolled out. This wasn't an issue before that event that had really only rumor-driven concerns around this vaccine. But what the country was sensible enough to do was, knowing that history, before they even started rolling out the COVID vaccine, where did they go to first? After the scientists, they went to the Islamic Council and said, we know that the public will partly listen to the science, but they want to know from the Islamic Council that it's okay to take these vaccines. And indeed, the Muslim body did declare the Chinese vaccine halal. As you can see, we do, in addition to routine monitoring of vaccine confidence more broadly, we also look at confidence around the COVID vaccine and willingness to take the COVID vaccine. Now, this is 17 countries that we surveyed back in June, July of 2020. And as you can see, there are no two countries that are exactly the same in their confidence level. It's very locally specific. It's about culture, it's about politics, it's about histories. Certain countries had histories of issues, and that stays within the minds of the public, as you just saw. But here we have a very highly varied landscape. This was later. We do these. One of the things we see also is that confidence in vaccines is highly volatile. Don't think that a survey you did last year is still the same this year. And in the context of COVID, it's changing by the month, by the week even. This is in December. This is a larger list of countries. And you can see, again, no two countries exactly the same. Lebanon, says 42.6% of the population said they would definitely not take a COVID vaccine. But in the context of conflict and distrust in government, and Pakistan also had a lower confidence, and there's other issues there. It's a mix of trust issues and politics, as well as the newness of the vaccine, which there are issues or questions about in many countries. But on the right-hand side, you can see that in addition to just these questions about whether people will take a COVID vaccine, we're also asking about age, education, employment, getting the background profile of the people who are responding to the questionnaires. And the interesting thing we found with the COVID questions is that more than any other factor, age, schooling, employment, the public perception of how well the government is handling the overall COVID response, including masking, lockdown, social distancing. If people feel like the government's handling it well, they were much more likely to respond they would take the COVID vaccine, which really points to a theme that we see again and again in these rumors, in these issues, is that the underlying driver of misinformation and dissent is often distrust. What's the context going to give you some background? One of the themes in my book, Stuck, is about emotions, is about the fact that we're not just looking at risk in an analytic, scientific way, but we're looking at it from a sense of feelings. What do we feel like the risks are different? And they're often different for different individuals and different communities, depending on where you live and what your experience has been. There's a lot of emotion in these pictures. This is around the age-old measles vaccine, because there was an additional vaccine added to the schedule for required vaccines for schools in Italy, because there was a massive outbreak of measles, has been in Europe, 83,000 cases across Europe a few years ago, including a young mother dying in France because she hadn't been protected as a child. This is in France, another country that added another requirement to the school list of required school vaccines. And there was, large gatherings in the street resisting the mandate. And one of the themes, and as has also recurred with the COVID vaccine, is this strong libertarian sense of don't control me, don't tell me what to do. Even if the intention is in the health of the public, there's a strong resistance because of a perception of control. And this is not just a higher income luxury issue. This is in countries around the world. We're seeing different movements coming up, and these parents put their children out there on the steps of in Indonesia in a public forum with all kinds of statements against vaccines, including, as you can see, even in the English, a sign which is clearly for international press. And this is in the US. And what this image to me captures so many of the different themes we see in what's driving the issues and emotions. Force my veggies, not my vaccines. And with the dollar signs evoking that this is, perception that this is just about money. Anxiety about vaccines causing autism is on one of this. Liberty, which we were just seeing in the streets of Italy and France. And the sense of being forced, and anxieties about vaccine reactions and safety. These emotions don't stay in one place, and particularly in our hyper-connected world. And one of the chapters in the book is on emotional contagion. These emotions, particularly with more and more images and videos, fuel and spread rapidly. This is in Colombia, in South America. 600 girls were across multiple schools were resisting the HPV vaccine because they had heard about girls in other countries who were having reactions to the vaccine. In the background of this image, there was a young boy kind of playing on his guitar about his sister who died, and he claims that she died because of an HPV vaccine. She did not. I mean, she did die, but it wasn't because of the HPV vaccine. But that points to one of the other issues in this situation is when these girls, and this is in Denmark, a very similar thing, all lined up, some of them in wheelchairs, even though the medical and health authorities assessed these reactions as being more psychosomatic than caused actually by the vaccine. The reality is, and the World Health Organization is now acknowledging this with some new guidance, that the experience of vaccination for some people can create physical reactions. And that we have to have empathy. You can't say just because it's not caused by the vaccine, you have to have empathy. These girls are physically experiencing reactions. Their reasons for that reaction is different from what their perception is, but we still have to have empathy with what their experience is. This is in Japan, and Japan was the beginning of what turned out to be a global spread. And the map I showed you in the beginning started in Japan. This was a group of girls who had a similar emotive, and then it became a physical reaction to these vaccines. The government got really anxious about the public reaction, and for 8 years now has not proactively recommended the vaccine. You can get it from the government, it's in the program, but you have to demand it. They do not want to proactively recommend it. I bring this, this was the Financial Times did this figure with our data in the global study. And I just come back to that because, as you can see, Japan has one of the lowest confidence in effectiveness and safety. And again, it was this experience around the HPV vaccine that had a knock-on effect more broadly in public trust in vaccines. It's even to this day, it's recurring now around the COVID vaccine. Anxieties hang in the air. This isn't anymore about the HPV vaccine. It's that underlying broken trust and concern. In 2018, the Nature journal asked me to write a commentary. There were a lot of discussions, particularly following the H1N1 pandemic, which didn't turn out to be as bad as could have been. But there were a lot of forums and discussions saying, are we ready for when there will be a big one? And they asked me to write my view. And I really thought, you know, we need to be ready. Misinformation is going viral, and it can really undermine our medical and technical response. It certainly has played out in the context of COVID. A lot of people ask me, do rumors and misinformation actually have an impact, or are they just fringe extremist views that we shouldn't be focusing our attention on? We did a control trial to try to get some quantitative answers to that question, even though I've certainly witnessed the impact of this on programs. But this was an 8,000 person study in the UK and the US, and with 4,000 in each country, nationally representative. We interviewed all of them about their COVID experiences and would they take a COVID vaccine if offered to them. In the UK, 54% said they would definitely take a COVID vaccine. And in the US, 41.2% said they would definitely take a COVID vaccine. And then for 1,000 in each country, we showed them factual, up-to-date information about the COVID vaccines. And for 3,000 in each country, we showed them 5 of the most frequently circulating pieces of misinformation, one at a time. We came back to them and interviewed all of them, again, about other questions about COVID. But in the context of that interview, post-interview, we said again, would you take a COVID vaccine? And there was a drop, a 6.4% percentage drop in the UK, down to 47.6% saying that they would be willing. And that amount wouldn't be such a serious issue if there was 85%. Of course, I'll take a vaccine. That would matter less. But with this already being below herd immunity, that a few points matter a lot. And what was interesting, we looked at each individual piece of misinformation and that impact also. And the piece of misinformation that was the most compelling is the one, the lower left-hand side, that looked the most scientific. So it's not true necessarily that people who are resistant to vaccine are anti-science. They want better science, is what they say. But it's about the interpretation of the science. And this looks like it could be from a genomics textbook, but instead it says, look, the mRNA vaccine is going to change your DNA to make us GMH, genetically modified humans. Now, clearly that's not the case. And just to assure you that at the end of this study, we made very clear to all of the respondents that this was misinformation. It was not fact-based, so that no one left the study with thinking that any of this information was correct. We've been working recently with Africa CDC. We have partnerships around the world, and with UNICEF, we're doing surveys and research in 17 countries in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. With WHO, we're doing work across the Asia region. And in Africa, we're collaborating with Africa CDC to do surveys and research in 15 countries to get a sense of what is the environment and the readiness and willingness to take the COVID vaccine. We saw a very, oops, I didn't get the whole scope. There was a very diverse mix of countries. And again, like the global study, very different levels of confidence. But some of the key issues were COVID-19 is planned by a foreign actor. It's not real. Some of the countries thought it was China that was the foreign actor, and others thought the US. But that was one of the circulating things. Concerns that trials have killed people in the past, which were not, the particular issues were not fact-based. They were coincidental deaths that happened at the time of the trial, but not caused by the vaccines. The spread of the COVID-19 is because of 5G technology. We've seen the same thing here in the UK as a perception. It's not unique to that setting. And we also see that those who believe in these conspiracy theories are less likely to take a COVID vaccine. 23% say that they would not take a COVID vaccine if they believed in the theories, and it was less for those who said that they didn't believe these theories. Some of the main reasons across the 15 African countries that we are surveying are not dissimilar to anywhere else in the world. I don't trust the COVID vaccine. It's too new. It hasn't been tested long enough. I don't believe the virus exists. That also is even a concern or an issue in even higher income countries. I don't trust the safety of the vaccine. And we hear that a lot, even among healthcare workers, a concern that it hasn't been tested a lot. Even though we have a miraculous speed in the development and delivery of these COVID vaccines, I think as a health and scientific community, we have not done a good job of explaining why it's so much faster, why we've been able to do it because of some of the new technologies, because there was much more money available upfront to start trials, because we did processes in parallel instead of one after the other, which allowed us to get there quicker. We haven't explained that well enough. I don't feel like I'm at risk. That's another one, particularly with younger people. And I don't have enough information. None of these are unreasonable questions. And the important thing is to address questions, because in the absence of information is ripe for rumors. Rumors persist. They recur again and again, and some of the same rumors repurpose themselves for new events as they come up. This was the cover of the Times. It was a breaking story about a Russian disinformation campaign trying to undermine the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine with images of people turning into monkeys because there was an adenovirus was derived from chimp, a chimp-derived adenovirus. But when I saw this image, it reminded me of some of the archives in the London School of Hygiene Tropical Medicine and Wellcome Trust of anxieties 200 years ago that people would turn into cows if they got a vaccine, smallpox vaccine, because vaccine itself comes from the word vaca for cow, because that early smallpox vaccine came from cowpox. This is something you'd probably be familiar with. COVID is a hoax, is not unique to Africa. We've seen it on the steps in London. We've seen anti-vaccine protests. Manchester, again, we could see images like this from the 1800s, protests against vaccine, a sense of being controlled. In the 1800s, it was when the government imposed a mandate for the smallpox vaccination. It was actually the first anti-vaccine group was the Anti-Compulsory Vaccine League, not just Anti-Vaccine League. Again, the same sentiment is against government controlling, which has been a very big issue in the context of COVID. But this, again, is not just a libertarian ideological protest in India and some of the poorer countries in the world, and even in the wealthier countries. This is about survival. Lockdown means many people can't work, and that means putting food on the table. So we have to have empathy with some of these emotions while at the same time trying to mitigate the misinformation. This and more is in the book. And really, one of my points is that we have to recognize that evidence is not only the dry scientific facts, which is also important, but that emotions and testimonies in the public is very much to them valid evidence. And this is the website for my group, the Vaccine Confidence Project. If you want more information, we've got lots of interesting stories and histories, as well as emerging new data about COVID. Thank you very much.
Heidi, thank you for a really fascinating and engaging lecture. I was particularly interested because I have a colleague who's on sabbatical in Japan at the moment. And he was saying that while the incidence is quite low there, he was concerned that no vaccine has been approved yet. But he told me this was because they had had an issue with vaccines, so they had a negative history of vaccines. So he swallowed the rumor.
Yes.
So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. That was in the, it's true. It's been a long haul.
Yeah. So we have some questions here for you now, which I'll just go straight to. So Kate asks, vaccines are such an emotive subject for some people. How do we reason with those who are so strongly opposed to vaccines?
Well, I think for exactly that reason, that they're emotive, we don't take the tack of reasoning, take more of an emotional approach of empathy, for one thing. And I think you get around to reasoning, but I think one of the problems is that it has been very emotive all along, but it's been confronted with reason, and that's not really what people needed. And I think that's what's kind of frustrated people over the years. I think we need both. We need empathy with questions, particularly in a time like COVID. I mean, it's perfectly reasonable to be having questions. There's a lot of new issues. It's people are fragile in general after a pretty long year and not over yet. So I think we have to show empathy with questions, not judge people. But then I always try to find something I can agree on. It's very rare to find a conversation where there's nothing you can agree on. And I always try to find something that, in fact, I was on one BBC talk show where it was me and a mother who had whose child had turned out to be disabled because of measles, and then another mother who was refusing a vaccine. And I didn't know this until I landed in the studio that was going to be the the lineup. But the woman who refused a vaccine, she started off by saying vaccines are not 100% safe. And I could agree with her. I mean, we started out by my saying, you know what, you're exactly right. They're not 100% safe. And that already changed the tone of the conversation, because she was right. They're not 100% safe. And then I would start to move into the reasoning more. But I think having some empathy, acknowledging that, okay, you have some reason for concern, but let me bring another angle to it.
That's really interesting. And as a matter of interest, because I didn't hear this program, how did the mother of the child who had developed measles and it had a side effect, how did she interact?
Well, it was strange because the two mothers were on screen. So they didn't really, and I was live in the studio with the presenter because one of them was in one part of the UK and another in another part. This was in pre-COVID days, but so I was live because I'm in London. So they kind of countered each other a little bit, but because they were on screen, it was they were in their own space. Yeah.
So thank you. Sarah asks, the places where we get our news have become much more varied. How much do you think social media is to blame for spreading fake news in relation to vaccines?
Well, I think that the social media has allowed a huge amplification. There's actually a classic book that's kind of my risk Bible. It's called The Social Amplification of Risk. And I think you could rewrite that book and call it The Social Media Amplification of Risk. I think a lot of these sentiments have been there for ages and have expressed themselves in different ways around different vaccines. But the spread and scale of how things can travel with social media has dramatically changed the landscape around this.
Which kind of leads nicely into Bert's question. He asks, at least in the UK, would it be possible to make the passing of disinformation illegal?
That's a tough one. One, because, I mean, we do massive social media monitoring globally in 100 languages. There are millions and hundreds of millions of posts out there. And I talk weekly, actually, I have a weekly fixed time meeting with Facebook, in regular touch with Google, Twitter, we're starting with, and basically trying to kind of judge what do you take down and what don't you. It's hard to make some of this stuff illegal unless it's overtly harmful. Unless it's something like drink a quart of chloroquine to cure your COVID, you can take that down because that's going to kill somebody. But for the kind of disinformation that is seeding doubt and dissent and questioning, it's kind of tough to do that.
Thank you. Keith asks, is there a rejection of jabs as opposed to tablets? So does the form that this vaccine comes in make a difference?
Well, I think it's less about the form and more about the issue of prevention versus treatment. Because when you're sick and you really want to feel better, you're willing to take just about anything. Depending on how sick you are or ill or whatever. But one of the things that is a real tension point around the vaccine or a difficulty is that, you're putting, in general, injections into very healthy babies. And that's a bigger emotional issue for parents. It changes, the nature of the questions change as you become adults. And certainly we're facing that with COVID. We have a number of healthcare providers who don't want the vaccine. And they're grown-ups and, it's not about, but it's prevention. And when you don't, I think that's more the difference. There have been some newer vaccines that have different modes, like there's the oral polio vaccine, which is easier to administer, but there were equal issues with public resistance about that.
Piers asks, if doubters are more convinced by fake science, how do you help them understand how to spot the difference between fake and real science?
Well, I don't think you can always spot it just by looking at that. In fact, I wouldn't want to be the judge myself of seeing something that is without any experience in a particular field, know whether it's right or wrong. And that's part of the problem is people see things, they look perfectly credible because they don't really know what the field is, and then they'll share it. And I think the only way, I would say one of the things we're encouraging is think before sharing, stop before sharing, check before sharing. And go to Google, see if you can find a couple other things about it before you push send on anything that is even mildly seems ambiguous. But, a lot of this stuff, we don't know if they're ambiguous because we're not specialists in a lot of the information that we comes across our group or our posts.
And Piers has asked another question, which is one actually I was going to ask you too, so I'm going to go to that. Piers is asking, what do you think about vaccination passports? And I wondered whether you thought if vaccination passports were compulsory, would it help with the uptake of the vaccine?
I have to say, I don't understand the whole framing of it as vaccination passports. A passport is something that you got to get visas in to use, for one thing. I've had a yellow vaccination card since I was just about walking, and I still have it, and it has all the vaccines that you get on the date, and if it's needed, I've got it. If I want to travel to, Congo, I need to have a yellow fever vaccine. So I make sure I take that with me. It's in my folder with my passport. And for people who work in hospitals, sometimes they have to have a flu vaccine. For daycare workers, they also have to have a couple vaccines. Requirements for certain vaccines is not a brand new idea. To go to Hajj, the Muslim pilgrimage, you need, I think, 3, and I'm sure they'll add COVID because that's a mass gathering. That's a risk setting. The vaccine passports, the challenge right now with that notion, I think it's a good idea that people have certification whether they had a shot or not. But we just don't know how long they last. So we can't credibly put an expiry date on your passport because, frankly, we don't know. So it's still a reasonably theoretical debate, except for the fact that I think we all should have a card or, in your yellow book that confirms when you were vaccinated. Also, in case anything ever happens, you want to have the batch, the date, and which vaccine it was.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and like that, I was going to Tanzania a few years back and had to get the yellow fever vaccination because I would not have been allowed travel without it. But as you said, I'm vaccinated for life, so there is no expiry date.
Yeah.
So, and this is going to be your final question because I think we've grilled you enough and I think you've had many of these talks today. So Mark asks, why do you think, specific fears about a certain vaccine tend to be generalized to all vaccines?
Well, it depends on the nature of the concern. If it's about vaccination, the experience of it or the whole notion of it or it being required, that's, true for a number of vaccines. But some people have a specific issue with one vaccine, like MMR vaccines, the myth that they cause autism, that is pretty much stuck with a certain vaccine. HPV has its own kind of issues. The flu vaccine is, actually, it's interesting. The issues around flu vaccine are more, I don't really need it. I don't have to take that risk. It doesn't really work. It makes me sick anyway. But so each of them has their own character. But if it's more about government telling me what to do, that could be about any of them.
Great. Professor Heidi Larson, thank you so much for a fantastic lecture and for giving us your time this evening. It was fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks so much. Nice to be here. I wish I was really there.
I wish you were there. We'll be taking you out for dinner now. So
Yes.
I also want to thank you, our audience, for participating. Thanks for coming along and for your lectures, or your questions for the lecture. So we're back next Tuesday, and of course I've forgotten the date. It's Tuesday, the 9th of March. And we'll have the Fickling lecture on developments in children's lecture, which will be given by Sir Paul Nurse, and he's talking about what is life. So hopefully we'll see some of you then.
That's interesting. Okay.
They are interesting.